everyone. The day after the 9th of Av is the 10th of Av, and the Gemara in Maseches Tainis of Kaftet Amud Aleph 29a says that in the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, eventually the Babylonians, Samuch Lechashicha on the 9th, namely close to sunset, came into the Beis HaMikdash, Hitzitu bo et ha'or, they lit the fire, Vayadolek v'olech kol hayom kulo, and it burned for 24 hours. In other words, the majority of the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed on the 10th and not on the 9th of Av. And therefore, comes Rabbi Yochanan and says that if I was there when they made all these enactments of mourning, I would have made Tisha B'Av in the 10th of Av, simply because that's the day that the majority of the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So how come we have the bulk of our mourning on the 9th of Av? And I'd like to give 3 reasons for it. Reason number 1, because we can care less about the first temple, because after the first temple came the second temple. So whatever happened the first time is now irrelevant for us. Right now, what we care about is what happened during the second temple. Says the Shagas Aryeh in the Gvurot Ari, Ta'anit shelanu b'sreifat hasheni taloy hakol. Our fasting is totally dependent upon the second Beis HaMikdash being destroyed. And indeed, the second temple was destroyed on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, and not on the 10th. And therefore, that's the day in which we have the bulk of our mourning. He's not alone. The Or Sameach, Rav Meir Simcha Mitvinsk, who reached the 20th century, indeed says, it seems, the Rak B'Mikdash Rishon, Nisraf Rubo Ba'asiri. Only during the first Beis HaMikdash was this situation where the fire started on the 9th and went to the 10th, and the majority was burnt on the 10th. But the second temple was burnt on the 9th. And indeed, our practice is based on the second temple. Therefore, the Aruch HaShulchan, Rav Epstein, says that's why we started this period on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz for 3 weeks, and night on the 9th of Tammuz. On Yud Zayin B'Tammuz was the day that they breached the walls during the second temple. And that's what we care about, versus the first temple, which they breached the walls on the 9th. So therefore, it's called the 3 weeks and not the 3.5 weeks. So answer number 1, we don't really care what happened during the first temple. Second temple was what's relevant to us, simply because that's the closest to what we are now mourning for. The first temple was destroyed, but it was fixed. It was a second temple. Second temple has not been fixed as of yet, and therefore the Aruch HaShulchan goes on to say that it's Leinu Chamirlan Churman Ba'Icheni, by us, it's the second temple that's more severe. Indeed, from then, that's when we were dispersed all around the 4 corners of the earth, and ultimately, Tisha B'Av is the day we fast. Answer number 2 is, the 10th of Av does have significance. After all, the halacha is, in the Shulchan Aruch, that it's a great minhag to go ahead and to not eat meat or drink wine throughout the 10th of Av. Comes along the Ramah and chisels it down a little bit and says, only until midday. But then the Mishnah Bura adds on to the chisel and says, well, that's all the 9-day practices, not just meat and wine. So if the 10th of Av does have significance, what is the significance? The majority view in the Gemara is that we fast on the 9th. Rabbanan, the majority view say, Atchalta the Paranuta Adifa. And I'd like to give 2 more answers based on those 2 words, Atchalta and the Paranuta. Let's start with the first, Atchalta, the beginning. The beginning of the destruction of the temple, it's what concerns us, simply because when that fire was ignited, something changed. The pasuk in Yecheskel says that God said to Yecheskel, "V'hasiboti panai mihem, I will turn my face from them. V'chililu etzfuni, and they're going to profane my abode. Uva'u ba'pritzim v'chilalua. Foreign forces will come in and profane it." Ultimately, according to that pasuk, the minute that they ignited the fire, everything that was called the Beis HaMikdash, the holy place, became a place that is just another building in Jerusalem. They came and they made it into mortar, into bricks, into a building, from a holy place to a profane place. And indeed, the Chatam Sofer says in his responsum that ultimately the position of Rabbi Yochanan that we should have had the fast on the 10th was not accepted because of this reason. Ba'u ba'pritzim nitchalel nimtza, he says, misheshaltu bo zarim betet, the minute that they came in on the 9th, vehitzitu boesh, and they ignited the fire, miyad yatza lechulin. Ultimately, our mourning on the 9th of Av is not because it's the historic date in which the majority of the temple was destroyed. The majority was destroyed on the 10th. It's the historic date that the temple turned into a non-temple, that a holy place turned into a profane place. And ultimately, says the Chasam Sofer, Nimtza ba'asiri nisraf beit chol. So by the time the 10th came, all you had was a building that got burnt, not a Beis HaMikdash that was destroyed. The second answer is that we mourn the Atchalta, when they ignited that first fire, because at that moment, all the sanctity went away. And the third answer is Poranuta. Maybe Tisha B'Av is not about Beis HaMikdash being in existence or not existence, but rather the fact that Jewish tragedy, calamities, started that day. It all started way back when the Jewish people indeed sinned in the sin of the spies, and God came along and said, and therefore, this will be a day that you're going to cry for many things. And indeed, it's not just the Beis HaMikdash that we mourn for. The Mishnah talks about 5 things that happened on Tisha B'Av, and throughout the generations, many more things happened. As the Gemara says, and how do we know that the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed on that day? It is a day which is known to be a day as a victim for terrible events. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what the Rambam says when he lists these 5 events. He starts listing them, and all of a sudden he says, Ubo bayom amuchan leporanut, and on this day, which is ready to receive more tragedies, other tragedies happened. And in the keynote, on the night of Tisha B'Av, we say that B'leil zeh yifkayun v'yalelu banai, on this night we cried, the famous cry from the sin of the spies that we just mentioned. And the Kina goes on and says, Yom muchan haya bifko apkaot. It's a day ready for Jewish tragedy. From this perspective, you can understand why in the keynote we don't just talk about the temple, we don't just talk about what happened surrounding the destruction of the temple, but we talk about the Crusades, we talk about the burning of the Talmud in 1242 in Paris, and unfortunately, more recent tragedies like the Holocaust and what happened just 2 years ago on Simchas Torah. From this perspective, it's all based on the ancient Jewish custom that Tisha B'Av is not about just when was the Beis HaMikdash destroyed or not, but rather it was the day in which Jewish tragedies happened and continued to happen. As the Pseudo Rashi says on Divrei Hayamim, when there's a reason to eulogize, to cry for a Jewish tragedy, Dugma b'Tisha B'Av, shemaskirin kinot ala urugim b'gzeirot she'iru b'yameinu. Says Rashi, I lived in the Crusades, and on Tisha B'Av, it's the day that we mention them. So ultimately, we see that it's not about the Beit HaMikdash being destroyed on this day or that day, but rather that fire that started that day was also the fire that started Jewish tragedies for all generations. So to sum up, why the 9th of Av and not the 10th of Av? Number one, because of the fact that for us, the second Beis HaMikdash is the most important. Number two, Atchalta, the fact that the beginning started that day. When that fire was ignited, holy turned into profane. And finally, it's a day that started all Jewish tragedy.